Jane, could you begin by introducing yourself and giving us a skim of your UVA resume? Maybe mention your major, degrees, any organizations you're involved in at UVA, and internships you've held. And you can also talk about your career trajectory since.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me. I got involved with the Econ Career Office a little bit late in my UVA career, but it was super helpful for the time that I was involved attending events like this and getting a lot of help from Jen with career advice. Yeah, so I graduated UVA in 2020. I studied econ. So I double majored in econ and math in the college. I chose the international concentration for econ, and I chose the financial math concentration for math. I also minored in French. I was definitely interested in looking for some kind of multinational company where I could combine those three interests. But when I was at UVA, I was pretty involved in music groups across grounds. I was in an a cappella group. That was my big extracurricular, social and a bit academic, holding different positions in that club. But in terms of my work experience in and outside of college, so my summer before my fourth year, I found I was looking for internships in the kind of math, econ field. A lot of different analyst positions were appealing to me. So I really spent a lot of time applying on Handshake. I found an internship on Handshake and had a few different on-grounds interviews, one of which was with Allianz Partners, and that's what ended up working out for me. I worked as a financial analysis intern the summer of 2019 before my fourth year. And at the end of that, I had kind of an informal offer to return or keep them in mind for full-time employment afterward. So that internship definitely helped me get my foot in the door. And I did also really enjoy that experience. It was I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but it was a great experience in terms of getting real work experience outside of my club involvements at UVA and getting that opportunity to network a bit and just understand what a day in the life of an analyst at an insurance company would look like. So I really enjoyed that. I came back into my fourth year. I was still, involved in the same things, taking classes for my majors, continuing with my a cappella group, and then had a job search where I looked at other opportunities, but I really did focus on the opportunity I knew I had at Allianz. So by the end of the first semester, I had gotten all that buttoned up, reached back out, had the interview process, and I was set to begin working there in the summer of 2020. And as Jen, I'm sure, is familiar with, because I was going to her office hours with COVID and the havoc that brought upon many industries, including the travel and travel insurance industry that I do work in. I didn't end up getting to start work right after graduation. I, got a call from HR and was like, this is not the time, we're not going to be able to extend an offer. So in the interim, I worked at a law firm in Richmond. It's Brown Greer, if you're familiar with it. They've worked on several big mass claims settlements. So I was working as a claims reviewer and fortunately got a call back not too long after, in the middle of June, and did end up starting my current position as a performance analyst at Allianz Partners in August of 2020. And that's where I've been ever since. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background. Do you have any questions for that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that little overview. Just because, so this is our first panel focused specifically on the insurance industry, and it might be an area that students are a little bit unfamiliar with. Could you give us a little bit of like an overview of the insurance industry, but also specifically travel insurance, which is what Allianz Partners is focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. I was definitely unfamiliar with insurance before my internship and still had a lot to learn when I started here full time. So I work for Allianz Partners and I work specifically in the travel insurance segment. There are three other aspects of Allianz Partners. It's kind of four branches of a bigger insurance company. And those are Allianz Life Insurance, Allianz Health Insurance, and Allianz Assistance. we really don't see much of Allianz in the US, but across the world, especially in Europe, it's a lot bigger because it is a multinational company. My headquarter office is in Paris, and the overall company is based out of Germany. So a bigger presence across the world than in the US, if you're unfamiliar. I was as well at first, but yeah, in terms of the insurance industry with travel specifically, our business, we sell travel insurance through a variety of different partners and types of partners. So if you've booked travel on, a flight through Delta or American Airlines, you've seen an Allianz insurance offer in that booking path. We also have insurance sales through the more traditional retail travel agent business, the brick and mortar store. AAA also sells travel insurance. So those are some of the places you'll see travel insurance. In terms of the back end of the industry, what it's like to work in it, there are a lot of, and as an analyst, I'll probably speak to numbers a lot because that's what I'm used to every day, but there are a lot of metrics in the insurance industry that are unique to the insurance industry. And there are a lot of different roles beyond just one analyst position. So we have many different departments that work to price the insurance products and make sure we have enough funds in reserve to pay out any claims we receive. So some of the metrics we're looking at on a daily basis are ratios of our losses to the revenue, wanting to keep that within a certain threshold that is set by finance every year, and looking at, we'll dive deeper into certain claims that people are submitting. There's a lot of analysis to be done within that end of losses. And, anytime somebody submits an insurance claim, somebody in Allianz is either answering the phone or adjudicating it online. So that is a big element of the business. But it's also like a lot of other businesses where there's focus on the top line revenue and performance as well. So just like other businesses trying to grow partnerships and grow revenue from that end.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that really helped clear up a few things about the insurance industry. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but before we get into, exactly how you found or got the job, could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you did at both Brown Greer and then more currently the work at Allianz Partners? And, what do your titles mean? What does kind of a typical day look like at work?
Yeah, sure. So at Brown Greer, I was a claims reviewer. And like I mentioned before, they're a law firm that's specific to mass claims settlements. So they're not really doing individual cases the way some other law firms are. So I was part of a smaller program that summer, and I was reviewing claims as that were applying to be part of this mass settlement payout. And so I was reviewing documentation, looking for keywords and phrases and making sure they fit the qualifications to be eligible. And then also that there were certain tiers within, depending on how, we've all seen the commercials for like, if your loved one has been impacted by mesothelioma or something, it was like that. So making sure they're falling into the right bucket of claims within the protocol. So that was kind of an entry-level role at Brown Greer. They have opportunities from when I was looking into careers more specifically at Brown Greer, they have opportunities to advance a bit and become more of a specialist. So kind of managing a team of claims reviewers more, or working as an analyst on their programs, which I didn't get exposed to as much in my brief time there. But that's a little bit of what my day-to-day looked like at Brown Greer as a claims reviewer. As a performance analyst at Allianz, I am really working with data every single day, I would say. There are many different aspects to my role, but there is one element of reporting. We have a lot of internal and external reporting, whether it's on certain revenue drivers or just, overall monitoring, like how is the business doing? The executives are interested in that. People on my team are interested in the details, and then our partners are also interested. But in addition to that kind of running the business, there's also a lot of ad hoc analysis to be done, looking into certain business questions, or just performing a routine. How are we doing on a deeper level than what we see in these daily reports? So a lot of opportunity to dive into data, which for full transparency is something I really didn't do in college and was new to me in this job. But I think if you're at all interested in that, having an internship or some experience where you get your feet wet and learn a little bit can be really great. I find that the classes I took in college set me up pretty well to have a mindset to be good with working with data, but I definitely lacked the skills, but that's not to say you can't develop them and foster interest on your own. But so then working with those, ad hoc data requests and questions that we want to have data-driven answers for, I'm doing that. And then we also work with others. So I mentioned earlier too, there are multiple kind of analyst roles in our business. I sit on one team of performance analysts. There's also teams of analysts that work more in finance or more with operations, which is our call center and our claims adjudicators. And then there's analysts involved in pricing and involved in reserving funds for claims. So one thing I like about my job is that there's the opportunity to work with people from other teams on more cross-functional business questions. And especially with that work, there is an element of presentation in my role in my company, and I would imagine in many others. There's a lot of, my role is very much like down in the weeds of the data. And then we want to understand that and kind of wrap it up into an answer or a solution with recommendations to share with more senior leadership. So it's a really nice combination of getting to work with data and getting to be like, developing those skills and interest in data, and then also packaging it up, really synthesizing the data, and then also presenting to senior leadership and just other members of your team. So that's really a day in my work can be different depending on the day, but I think that covers about everything.
Yeah, that's great. So it seems like your role is somewhat of like a data analyst, data scientist within the insurance industry. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this a little bit about like looking through Handshake for opportunities and things like that when you were still in college. But just adding on to that, how did you find this job? And then where did you like maybe go to different events at UVA that were hosted by the employer? But I guess if you could just go a little bit more into how you found the opening.
Yeah. So Handshake was really helpful for me for internships, especially going into my fourth year was when I focused on that. And that's how I got the internship that kind of gave me the connection to have an in and, have somebody vouching for me internally. But yeah, I searched on Handshake. I looked on LinkedIn a little bit, but I think Handshake was a really useful tool as a college student, looking for those entry-level jobs or internships. And then both the econ career office and the more broad UVA career office host different, career fairs and special interest nights. And I found attending those, especially when I was really looking for a full-time job, was really helpful to hear from the companies themselves and representatives of them, and to have an opportunity to meet someone and not just be like another resume in the however many resumes they receive for this internship or full-time job application, but to get to talk to someone and understand a little bit what their job is like, what their company is like, and then have that face-to-face contact and build a little bit of a network connection there. I definitely went to those a lot, especially as I would say now I'm really happy in my analyst role, but I could not have pictured myself being in this when I was in college, especially not as a second or third year. So I really took advantage of those opportunities to learn more about different fields. And even if it was a lot of like, okay, I went to this session on investment banking. And you know what, that is really not for me. And it can be a little bit overwhelming. Like, okay, all of these fields feel not for me. It was really good to just expose myself a little bit and the opportunities were available, you know? So yeah, those were most of the resources I used. Also spent a lot of time building my resume and getting advice on those simple questions that you might not know who to ask. Like, how do I reply to this email from a recruiter? Or what do I say in this case? What's an appropriate timeline? How do I ask someone to be my reference? I spent a lot of time in the econ career office and in the general career office working on those skills.
Yeah, that actually bleeds really well into the next question I was going to ask you. Obviously, the internship that you had the summer before your fourth year with Allianz really helped you get a full-time position there as well. But for the internship application, how did you kind of prepare for that process, you know, applying and then getting the job?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was completely new to me at the time. And looking back on it, it was a pretty overwhelming experience to go from. I always had summer jobs that, like I was a lifeguard in high school or I was a math tutor. So not the like hard corporate experience that some of my peers had. So the first time I was really applying to internships, it was a new experience for me. I really, first, you know, the first thing I did was build my resume again with a lot of help from the career office. And then really just applied, especially since I wasn't set on one specific role. You know, I applied pretty broadly to the opportunities that were available. And I found that having a couple practice interviews that were not necessarily practice at the time, but looking back, it's like, okay, that was not my best job, but it was good practice for my interview with my current employer, you know? So I would definitely build in either practice interviews where it's something that you're maybe, you know, it's maybe you're super set on one career, and I would encourage you to explore outside of that, if nothing else, for practice, like applying and getting experience like that. But or, you know, I think the career offices have practice interview opportunities, which is great too, that I didn't really take advantage of, but would be great. I think practice is really helpful, especially when it's your first time applying to things like that. It's just a whole new world than college. And interviews, you know, especially if you're getting nervous or if you don't love public speaking, feeling like you're prepared going in, that was a really helpful feeling for me, because by the time I had the interview for my current position and my internship, I had already had a couple, and I was like, okay, well, I know what didn't work the first time, and I know I've perfected my answers to these questions a little bit more. So I think practice was a big thing for me.
Absolutely, practice makes perfect. So it kind of like going from your internship role at Allianz to then transitioning full time. I'm sure you made a lot of different relationships while you were there as an intern. Did you do any networking with employees at Allianz before turning into full time, and how did you kind of establish and maintain those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I did stay in contact with, I had two supervisors in my internship, but then I will say my internship was also structured so that I had the opportunity to meet other people in the business and get to know beyond my one silo of financial analysis, which was great. So during my internship, you know, my closest network were my supervisors, right? But we had our general team and then those other opportunities to meet other functional areas. I relied a lot on LinkedIn and just adding people on LinkedIn as soon as I met them. And then also at that time I was in the office, this was 2019. So trying to, you know, if we're all in the break room making connections, obviously not as easy virtually. I'm very familiar with the difficulties of networking virtually, but yeah, I would say just trying to connect with people and follow up immediately with a note or a LinkedIn, you know, connection request is really impactful. to kind of secure that connection. And in addition to that, in terms of actually utilizing those connections to get my job now, I did, when I was beginning my job search process in the fall of my 4th year, I was looking at other opportunities, and I also was reaching out to my supervisors from the prior summer, just saying, hi, I'm looking for opportunities now. I really had a great experience in my summer internship and would like to keep Allianz in mind as I'm looking for jobs. And I think something that's hard in college for me was keeping on top of prompt email communication, especially with the professional world, as they're much more attached to their emails. Like in school, it was easy for me to just have my emails pile up, as a lot of them are, collab emails and stuff like that. But yeah, I think looking back, prompt email connection and response time is pretty important as well, keeping that connection alive and not dwindling out.
Definitely. How you kind of mentioned like networking and COVID. How has COVID-19 affected your industry, both in like the work that you're doing? I'm sure travel insurance has probably been affected a lot, but also in your ability to kind of like get that full-time position.
Yeah, I was fortunate that I had the opportunity to be in person. And I think at this point, employers and employees are used to the remote environment. My company still is optional fully remote. We could go into the office in Richmond, but there's no expectation to. I think we're kind of doing a soft return in December, but mostly remote. So I have met most of my coworkers and my boss remote and all of that good stuff. So it's been challenging, like learning to network in a remote environment is really weird, especially as someone who wasn't super prone to be like a big networker anyway. I think Jen gave me advice once on the phone saying, like, think of networking, don't think of it as networking, like think of it as just talking to people and seeing if it turns into a connection that that will be helpful to you down the line. So thinking of it as just talking to people does really help. And, I have been more focused on networking internally within my community of coworkers already that I might not see on my daily Zooms and everything. So one thing inside of my company, which I guess this is more specific for once you already have the job, but trying to establish yourself within the company, I try to say yes to working on cross-functional, like cross-team projects, or even just if it's a call, some of the senior leadership in my company has been doing, you can sign up for like a virtual coffee chat with them. I think even though it can seem awkward and over Zoom, there's the awkwardness of like, oh, we're talking over each other, whatever. There's so much awkwardness to it, but I think it's really worth it. And I always leave those conversations feeling really great. It is just talking with people. So yeah, I think stepping a little bit outside of your comfort zone and taking the chance to either sign up for something, or especially when you're not already in the position of having a job, trying to establish yourself, just thinking of some kind of professional message to reach out to people, whether it's over LinkedIn or through the alumni network. Some of my friends who hadn't found their full-time job yet by graduation and were doing something part-time in the middle, they spent a lot of time reaching out to UVA graduates in the field that they were interested in on LinkedIn or through the alumni communication network. So that was really helpful for them. And I think it's a really powerful way to connect with someone, especially if you have the shared experience of having gone to school together. Like, people love to talk. They love to talk about UVA and their career. And I think it can never hurt as long as you're presenting yourself in a professional and appropriate manner.
Could you talk a little bit about like maybe what specifically you wrote in your messages to alumni on LinkedIn? Maybe what content was in your message and how you structured it?
Yeah, I actually ended up not doing very much of that because of the timing. I only had like a couple months where I was really on the job search during COVID remotely. But during that time, I did connect with a couple different UVA alumni or even just like extended family members that I hadn't talked to, but were in a similar industry. Um, and, I guess first, a lot of those connections I made through someone like Jen, where she was priming the alum saying, I'm sharing your contact information with Jane, and she's interested in this if you have the time to chat with her. And then I would follow up and say, hi, whomever this is, like, my name is Jane Goodwin. I recently graduated from UVA. I'm interested in some kind of XYZ position. For me, it was I'm interested in analysis and I'm interested in data analysis and performance analysis work. Jen Jones gave me your contact information because she thought it might be she thought you might be a good person to reach out to about this. And after that, really just, then I would say just asking like, is this something you are available for? I'd love to chat whenever you have a moment.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect example that students can kind of like build off of. Um, Kind of going back to the question that I asked before, we talked about how COVID has kind of impacted your like job search. But could you maybe talk about how it's also impacted just the work that you're doing and how the travel industry is faring?
Yeah. I guess first it was especially at first in earlier in 2020, the unpredictability of it was what really impacted my work. I think that was the biggest reason why in May I was getting a call saying, hey, I know you're supposed to start in June. We can't unfortunately hire you right now, just because nobody could expect what was to come. In terms of the travel industry and travel insurance specifically, it has been a very interesting time to be so tuned into it and working with it because, our metrics are very tied to the atmosphere around COVID. And we saw, and a lot of our partners saw in like this early summer to midsummer months, so like May to July, when vaccines were widely available and widely getting distributed, and it was summer. COVID cases were less anyway, and it was summer travel. Kids were home, families were able to finally do something. We did see like a pretty big travel boom that even then at the time, the unpredictability of it, we were all kind of like, okay, well, how long is this going to last? And then with the Delta variants, we did see a corresponding decline. So it has been an interesting time. And I would say it's really just a volatile time. Like you never know what's going to happen next. So as much as our business is trying to plan for the future and prepare, it is interesting to compare where we thought we would be 3 months ago to now.
Yeah, exactly. You never know what's going to happen with COVID. um, so kind of switching over, we want to make sure that students are also prepared for their internship search and their own full-time job search. What technical skills do you think prospective hires should work on within your organization or in field? So I guess specific to insurance, but then also since you're kind of working more of like a data analysis like job function, what technical skills do you think are critical for those roles?
Yeah, I guess specifically to insurance, but really specific to any industry, it is always beneficial to familiarize yourself with some of the main metrics of that industry. Like what I was saying before, we look at something called loss ratio, which is the ratio of our claim dollars to our revenue dollars. And especially going into a technical interview, looking back, that would have been very beneficial for me just to, be primed, even though you can't necessarily predict what they will throw at you. Knowing some of the metrics and key things to be prepared for could be really helpful. But outside of insurance, a lot of the tools and hard skills I use on a daily basis are pretty generic to data analysis in any industry, I would say. We use SQL, if you're familiar with that. It's a structured querying language to extract data from our databases. I think that is a really big skill. I also personally use R a lot to code, just to help when you're handling large data sets. And you can also, connect between SQL programs and software and R to seamlessly extract data and then input it into Excel after some manipulation. So really the two hard skills I use on a daily basis would be SQL and R. I will say though that I didn't have either of those skills going into my internship. And I think it can be tricky to develop hard skills like that in college when, especially, in an econ major, you really want to understand the fundamentals behind econ, and they want to expose you to the theory and get you understanding that rather than producing some really strong coders. But I think if you have interest in any of that, or if you have interest in some kind of analysis position, taking the time to on this side, or if you find a class that does it, that's awesome. That's really great. Like two birds with one stone. But taking the time to look into LinkedIn Learning or other data training tools, there are free sites out there where you can practice those skills. And at least for me, the biggest thing was showing that I was willing and able to learn to do it. I didn't know SQL, but I didn't even know SQL going into my full-time job. But the fact that I was willing to learn and able to learn was enough. And for R, I had taken one coding class, I think, in college, and as part of my majors. And so I had a baseline understanding, and that baseline understanding took me far enough to be able to learn from others in my internship and, show that I had interest in learning, and then show that I could figure out how to do it. And at least in my job, and I think this is similar across companies, there's a lot of reliance on open source code. So that makes it easy. Like if I have a question about how to do something in R that I think is possible, but I don't know how to do, like I spend a lot of the time Googling it and working with my coworkers on like, I feel like this should be possible. How can I use R to like make my whatever report look better or work easier? So a lot of Googling goes into my daily work. And yeah, just showing that I'm willing to learn was a big thing. But I guess aside from that, also familiarity with Excel is important. A little easier to learn as it's a little more visual and user friendly, but Excel is a big one. My company also uses PowerPoint, which we're all familiar with, but being able to, that's less of a necessity, I would say. I'm not a PowerPoint genius, but I can use it. So yeah, those are really the tools and skills I would highlight for my job. But again, it's all about willingness and ability to learn.
Yeah, definitely. There's like limited opportunity, I would say, for students to get experience working with some of those programs and with like large, big data sets, but it's definitely good to get a little bit of like a baseline understanding of those things. You mentioned having a technical interview for the internship or the full-time position, which I thought was really interesting. Could you maybe talk about how your technical skills were assessed in that technical interview, or maybe if you could get into like the type of questions they asked you during that?
Yeah, thinking back to my internship, it was a less intense technical interview. I think I had an hour or an hour and a half for the full interview. So some of that was the getting to know you behavioral interview, and then some of that was the technical interview. And for that, it was a while ago, and I don't remember the details perfectly, but I think they just handed me a sheet of paper, and I was going through a little bit of their everyday financial calculations. It was really like a math-based, we'll give you a calculator, but we want to make sure you can understand what's going on behind these numbers, like reading the definitions and then producing the results. I will say I didn't think I did great in that. I made a few calculation errors and it was okay. Again, like when they said like, are you sure about that? And I was looked back at it and was able to correct it. I think that showed that I was able to recognize a mistake and fix it and be fine, move on. In terms of my full-time interview, they had a little more intense of a case interview process. They provided a sample data set in advance and a couple of business questions about it that they wanted a data-driven answer for. So then I was manipulating the data and looking for answers to those questions. Granted, I did have experience at that point with the company, with insurance as an industry, and that made it a little easier. But yeah, they provided a data set, gave me some questions to answer, and then I consolidated my findings into a presentation to share with them on the day of the interview.
For that technical portion, did you have time to work on, I guess, like the data parsing prior to your interview, or was it kind of like on a limited time that you were just doing like on the day of the interview?
Yeah, the whole data set was provided in advance, which was really great for me. I definitely, especially with like the nerves of an interview, would need to take my time. So it was provided at least like a week or two in advance, and I had time to put it together.
That's great. Thank you for providing a little bit more insight onto the actual interviewing portion. So we do want to switch over to the student Q&A now. Students, if you have questions, feel free, again, as we said before, you can unmute yourself and ask it directly. Or if you're feeling more comfortable with this, you can also send the question through the chat function directly to me, and I'll read them out. But yeah, if anybody has questions, we can ask them now.
Hi, Jane. So I wanted to know, was there anything in particular that you did at UVA that like really prepared you for your job now? And do you have any suggestions of things that we might do to kind of prepare ourselves for a job in insurance or in kind of data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think two parts, I guess. I did, where possible, like in the CIOs and clubs that I was involved in out of interest, my interest and my passion for my fun stuff was music. So where possible, I tried to involve myself in the math side of those organizations. I held the position as business manager, which was basically just like accountant for my a cappella group, which definitely helped build my resume a little bit. In hindsight, I wish I had taken advantage more of the more academic clubs and opportunities to work on different projects where I think there was a lot of opportunity that in those clubs or competitions or organizations to get more familiar with data analysis or some of the tools that, as we mentioned before, there's not a lot of opportunity to use in class. So I can't think of specific examples, but I'm sure the Econ Career Office has many where there are opportunities to involve yourself in those academic or business casework type questions. And from speaking with my boss or with my supervisors in my internship, that kind of work is really impressive if it's something you're interested in or something you're interested in learning about.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Jane. I was wondering what drew you to this industry specifically, and why did you choose this over other industries that we tend to hear more about at UVA?
Yeah, that's also a really good question because especially fall of my fourth year when I was looking for full-time opportunities, there wasn't a lot of information on insurance specifically. It was kind of that I already knew this company that drew me to it. But what first attracted me to Allianz Partner specifically, as I mentioned before, I minored in French, and I really wanted to work for a multinational company where there was opportunity to utilize French speaking skills or just be a little more immersed in an international culture than others. So once I had my internship, I really liked that about the company and knew that my interest was definitely in that. No matter what industry I ended up in, I did have the opportunity to work with the office in Paris in my internship and like utilize some of my French speaking skills. And it was just a great experience to be able to do that, especially as an intern. So really less the industry and more the company is what drew me to this job. But I think if you're interested in data analysis, I think it's a field that is very transferable across industries. I feel I love my job and I love the industry I'm in, but I feel like if that changes, I could easily move into data analysis in another industry. And that kind of gets your foot in the door if you're interested in moving into a different field eventually. That's great too. But I really like the flexibility in terms of industry that comes with data analysis work.
Great, thank you so much.
Just gonna wait and see if any students have any questions. Maybe they'll send through the chat to me. But if not, I have a few other questions to ask, so that is also fine as well. Okay, then I guess I'll go ahead. So we talked a little bit about, what makes students good and primed for these positions. But for yourself personally, what qualities do you think that you possess that employers found really attractive for the position?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said before, I think the willingness to learn and the interest was really important. I think I was also aware that I didn't necessarily possess all of the hard skills they were asking for on the job description, but the fact that I still applied was great. I think it's, especially as an entry-level job coming from a field of study where the employer should know that you're not necessarily possessing all of those hard skills. Working on developing your soft skills, like just communication, like I mentioned before in the case interview, a big part of the presentation part of it was more so my ability to communicate what I worked on rather than the hard skill of working on it. They wanted to see both. And I think I took time in my organizations and classes, going to office hours, things like that, to work on soft skills like collaborating on team projects or just studying in a group, communicating in presentations. I think having professional speaking skills too, like just being able to communicate in a professional manner and even just like the way you speak, like clear and concisely. I know I'm saying like a lot now that I think about it, but trying not to use those interrupters, things like that. Those were, I imagine as an employer, that's something they saw in me that made me stand out because, admittedly, I didn't have the hard skills that probably some other candidates had, but in my role, at least, and in many data analysis roles, you have to be able to be in the data and do all of the technical work and then also communicate it to people who are not in the data, so who don't necessarily know what you mean when you're talking about a certain model or a certain metric that's very data specific. So being able to communicate that and show in an interview that you have those soft skills was really important.
Yeah, that's really great. I think something that students can also learn to adopt now too. I think you've mentioned it, like here and there throughout the panel, but would love to know what have been some of your proudest moments and also some of your setbacks that you've experienced in your career thus far.
Yeah. I think both of those revolve around presentation for me. In college, in econ classes and math classes in general, there's not a lot of opportunity to present or a lot of need to present. I had a little bit in my French classes, but putting together like a relatively elementary to intermediate French presentation is pretty different from a data analysis presentation. So early on in my career, I got at Allianz, I was involved in a cross-functional team that put together some research on claims. You know, at the time, it's still a topic of interest, but especially in 2020, when, as you can imagine, there were a lot of travel insurance claims coming in, and senior leadership really wanted to get underneath those and understand what was driving them, what people were claiming for, what was being paid, what was being denied, what people were giving up on, where were the claims coming from, and what were the pain points within them. So I was involved in a team working on that, and it was a great experience as starting out as a remote employee, but it also meant I was thrown into presenting to seniors pretty early on in my career. And I did receive some feedback that my presentation skills could use improving, you know, and I knew that, you know, I was like, yeah, you're right. I read from the slide the whole time because I really didn't know what I was talking about. But I think one, taking that critical feedback and not being like offended or hurt by it and moving on, using it as a reason to learn and develop and then prove next time that like, here's where I've gotten from. So then two instances related to that where I felt really like proud of myself in my career. I was on a call with a partner and that same leader later where I was presenting, and I felt pretty great about what I had presented. You know, I thought I concisely didn't overwhelm the people with information, but concisely told them what was happening on the slide. And receiving that positive feedback on my presentation skills from the same leader that had helped me before recognize that they needed improving was really great. It was a really great feeling and really powerful to like empowering, you know, that even though it wasn't something I learned in school or got a lot of experience within school, you can still keep learning outside of school and developing these professional skills. It doesn't have to be perfect when you come in. So that was a really great feeling. And then recently another presentation where a different leader, but my boss called me up after and was like, that was really great. And I'm proud of you. So moments like that are really nice, especially in a corporate world where you don't necessarily expect those kind of conversations to happen, those kind of human interactions. That's something that I've really appreciated in my career. I appreciate it in my team and my company. And it's something that's worth like noticing and sticking with, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you were able to have those kinds of professional achievements. So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing. We are going to wrap up the panel a bit soon, so I just have one last question for you. And to wrap up, we were wondering, you know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or if that's a little bit too difficult to answer because I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 5 years, do you think this is more of like your dream job, or do you see yourself using it as like a stepping stone for another career?
Yeah, that's a great question, one I'm currently asking myself. But yeah, I don't know. I could see it going many different ways, and that's what's exciting, scary, but exciting about when you graduate college and have a lot of different paths open in front of you. It's overwhelming at first, but now that I've been on a path that I feel great about, I'm enjoying my work. It's fun to think that I could be in the same company in a different role. You know, maybe I'll move up to a more leadership position, and that would be really cool. You know, managing a team could be great. Or maybe this is a stepping stone for me and I end up moving into a different industry. I have been interested in, you know, like nonprofit work. I think that could be very interesting, not something I'm pursuing or thinking about pursuing, but yeah, I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be like a young professional and have a lot of opportunities open, and we'll see where I am in 5 years. We'll see.
Definitely have to keep us updated. Um, So we want to make sure that students and Jane have all the allotted time that they should have for their office hours. So we'll be closing the panel here. Thank you, students, for attending, and thank you, Jane, for providing your valuable insight. This is really great and informative.